Hi, my name is Ken Asseson. I wrote Microbiome Prescription website, and today I want to talk about the correct and the incorrect ways of using published studies on medical conditions. And one of the reasons is I see a lot of commercial direct to retail labs do a naive application of the literature to people microbiome samples. Sometimes they are lucky, sometimes they are not. I wanted to go through the technique or the issues involved so that you can better understand what should be going on and what should not be going on. So let's go over and take a look at our outline, our agenda. Okay, we are going to be first looking at a variety of sites for getting data from it. We're going to look at the problem of you get reports, you get results, but the report is not as is actually as meaningful as you would like it to be. There's some challenges to it. So we're going to go and take a look at it. Standardization is the key word here. Then we're going to look at the fact that sometimes there can be two shifts involved. The persons could be too high or it's too low in the same study, not the same individual person, but some people are too high and some people are too low. Basically, people are simply abnormal and the shift does not go necessarily one way or the other. Then look at the criteria for reporting a significance, which is usually used by the researchers, and that is where you get a bit of an eye-opening. And then I'm going to go through some of my punts, my hacks, my workarounds in making use of the prevalence of a condition as a proxy for what the published studies generally do not do, and then a quick summary. So, with that much said, let's walk into just a little bit of a quagmire. So, we have a lot of sources of studies. And usually I've been work largely with the PubMed or the National Institutes of Health studies for my main source, mainly because it's free. Most of the time I get the full text and it's just simply fast and efficient. And it actually allows me to avoid having to do a whole ton of manual entries of citations or studies because I can automate it. They have a nice API, so that really makes it sweet for being able to just walk in, put in a link to a study, and get all the bibliographical information automatically via a little bit of code I wrote and get it to the database so that data is complete and the cost is very low. Many of these other things you can get sweet data, but you also have more overhead. And generally, being a one-man operation without any venture capital backing it, I tend to work for efficient solutions and the best return for every hour I spend doing it. So that's why we have a ton of sites which you can check, and depending on how deep you want to go, you can go through it. In theory, a good person will go through all of the sites and look for everything of concern to the person. Okay, now let's take a look at, in the blue you have an actual quote from a study I was reading this morning. And often this report is not too far away from what often is done. Basically say, hey, we found some differences and we feel they are notable, whatever notable means. That is subjective evaluation. And we notice the following bacteria are increased. Whether or not, how much it's increased, and a whole bunch of other characteristics which are probably very critical for knowing whether or not there's a shift of concern to you is missing, or if you're lucky, it's buried somewhere in the study or the appendix, but most of the time it's not. I mean, literally most of it. Typical problems is they do not give what the probability value. Some will report if a p-value of 0.1, 1 chance in 10 of it being a false association. So other will go to 0.5, which means 1 chance in 20. Other will go to 0.1, 1 chance in 100. My own criteria for when I do analysis, it's generally 1 is 0.005 or 1 in 200 odds of happening at random, which means if I find 10 variety, there's only a slim chance one of them would be a false positive. So the absence of p-value really impacts the ability to interpret it. Other issue is it says it's an increase, but is there a threshold where if it's above this threshold, the odds of having this condition goes up significantly over everybody else? The keyword is what is magic value, where you can use to differentiate between the two. There's mathematics to do that in data science, in some of such as random forest, to be able to get those values. But generally, the studies lack it. Often it's because the person doing research may not particularly be a great fan of mathematics, especially advanced mathematics. So we are missing that information. We also missing how the data was processed. As in, did they just do the average and found there was difference? Did they calculate the median value? Did they do some other type of statistics? We don't even know which statistical method they used to detect a notable increase. Was it the median, the mode, the mean, or any one of literally several dozen different measures that could be done? The study doesn't tell. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And if they do, usually it's the mean. That is what we commonly call the average. Often factors are excluded from the study, like this applies to this gender or this age group. Often results for the same condition would be different for different genders or for different age groups. And different gender is well known and different age group is getting to be more well known. So the problem is the report that you go and say, oh good, yes, it's simple. If I have these features are high, therefore I must have. No, you can't use that logic. It is bogus. What you have to do is do some bit more deeper work. So let's go and first look at the results of the study, what was found. That's, as you saw, found half a dozen different bacteria shift. But the catch is this. There are 97 different ways. This was from about 1997. Or this is from about 5-10 years ago. Same raw data. I don't mean just a sample. I mean the digital. They take in a sample, push it for a sequencer, getting the information out and getting a digital file. The same digital file, which is absolutely rigorous, will give you 97 different answers. What you found to be high in the study, if you took the same sample and pushed it through the same digital samples, identical same digital samples, and push it through a different pipeline, you may get 7 different bacteria being significant and higher, and none of those are shared between the 2 samples. This is where you absolutely throw up your hands saying, wait a minute, how can we use it when we don't know if the results apply to the results of my own microbiome test, which is probably a very, very likely 99% chance of it being done a different way. So how can you apply? It is apple to watermelons. Not just apple to oranges, it's apple to watermelons. 2 very big different things. To read more on the issues, I gave a link to where that quote came from, as well as my own observations, and I found that, I get very different associations for people reporting the same symptoms with big samples for people who process the data through uBiome, through Ombre, or through BiomeSite. I get different bacteria association with less than 5% agreement on which bacteria are shifted. In other words, this is not a trivial problem. It is inherent to things. Problem disappears if you are working from data and association from the same lab that you got processed through, which is why my citizen science one is sort of a salvation. Okay, key thing to emphasize is the same file from the sequencer. The sequencer is where your piece of shit comes in and a digital file comes out. And that that digital file is interpreted using a software and reference library. And you can use the same software with different reference libraries, so that you need to have both those parts being identical and identical same reference, and chances are whoever you had your sample processed through did not use the same sample as that report came from. So um, we have some challenges. Basically, every bit of information is ambiguous association. Same set of samples executed by a different pipeline will make it very different results. And not may give is very likely to, very, very high probability from my observations looking at samples processed through three different ones with the same symptoms and the absolutely lousy agreement between the three of them as to which bacteria are significant. Sample sizes are often too small, which means typically if there's two bacteria which are shifted together, you will get them reported individually. But if you are able to do pairs of bacteria and see if this pair shifts together, you'll get often better results than single bacteria by bacteria. But because you only have a small sample size, you can't do the pairing. You end up having to go by one bacteria at a time. One thing I noticed that few studies have often reported significance as being outside of the reference range. As in, some people with the conditions are too high, and some people with the conditions are too low. Most of the time, people doing the studies look for one or the other. A few studies check for both and frequently find that we get shifts on both sides. Things like age, gender, ethnic background, and diet already factor into the result. Somehow, it's assumed everything else is controlled, and it's not. Studies are in many ways horrendously uncontrolled. They are common sense studies, and common sense does not particularly apply well. So, here we have what is the criteria for reporting significance. Let's start with assumption. We could assume somebody comes in and say, I have a condition, I am type 2 diabetic. Okay, just as an example. And you read the studies and you say, okay, here is all list of all the bacteria where things are increased or decreased. But the problem is because we have no idea of what the value numbers are, all we have is this very vague, it's too high or too low. It basically becomes unusable for prediction. Let's go over and take a look at something. So I'm over on Microbiome Prescription website under the Informational Studies Library Condition, and I went and started typing DIA for diabetes, found a bunch of things here, and the one I'm particularly interested in is the taxons. And what we hear is we have by individual study, what type of shifts are we seeing. Some cases, only one study ever reported a particular type of shifts. Other cases, we have, for example, Akkermansia municipal. We have 5 studies reporting it low, but we have 4 studies saying that the genus is low and 1 reporting it as being high, which is not exactly what you expect. Number one, we have 5 reporting low and 3 reporting high. And frequently they would be in agreement. Other cases, they are in disagreement significantly. The space between indicate the differences. So we have a whole bunch of bacteria which, depending on the lab you're using, may become significant to being high or be low. And now you could apply it to results of the different labs. And now we end up with a little bit of a challenge, as in, okay, these are all sorts of different labs. You're coming from different labs here, so how can we get some reasonable assumption of it? What just indicated is, given a condition like diabetes 2, our criteria is should this bacteria be selected to be modified? In other words, it's just one which is probably significant for the person having diabetes. A match is very simple. If the study report high or low, and that's all it reports, then basically we have a match being, do you have it above the average against other people or below the average for other people? And that is because that is how most studies report, is just computing the average. So you end up with a very, very coarse one. So you got a 50-50 chance for any bacteria that is you're looking at being a match. That is lousy odds, especially for trying to predict, especially when you know there's high unreliability in terms of what is being reported. Not reliability. It's very reliable. It's very ambiguous because of the different okay. By training, I am a statistician, operations research person. I've written expert systems for close to 40 years now. I have taught artificial intelligence at third level university courses. So looking at it and looking at all the issues, then I ended up coming up with what I call punts or workarounds. The first one is we look at the incidence of whatever diagnosis you have. Simple as that. Keeping to the example of diabetes, we go and we check the search, and search often will give the incidence by age, by location, by gender, etc. But what we look at is the incidence, and I suppose the incidence works out to be about 12%. And then we look at what bacteria is, and we say, oh, Akkermansia municipale is low, therefore we set our threshold to be 2 times this, or 24th percentile. 12% of the population have it. We end up 2 times that for 24th percentile. You could do 3 times if you want, but in generally you should never go over 50th percentile. Usually I find 2 gives reasonably good results. So if there are in the 24th percent bottom 24th percentile, we deem it to be a match. And similarly, if it's too high, then it's 2 times 12. So if they're over the 76th percentile, we deem it to match if it's something which is reported as being high. So selecting bacteria is an either or. Here's the criteria. Here's the threshold. It's an approximate threshold, but so far it seems to be doing reasonably well. But we want something more. We want a weight or importance so we can make a relative judgment call. And for that one, what I do is I end up saying, look, it's ambiguous if this is the right bacteria or not. But the more often it's reported by different studies, the more likely it is the right bacteria. So I do a very simple look at the bacteria that is most reported for this particular condition. And if we go back here, we go down, up or down, you can see a fair number. There we have bifidobacteria, and you see we have 9. 6 reported too low and 3 reported too high. Cough, cough, cough. Part of the problem. So, but there's 9 reports. We use that as our magic number. For Akkermansia municipale, we have 5, so 5 or 9 should be the rate. If we go back and take a look at something like Privitella, let me go and see if I can find Privitella. Okay, that's not. There we have. We have 5 being too high and 2 being too low. And of course, you can go and there's links to all the studies there. But basically, if we have a match of Privitella being too high, then the odds become 5 or 9. If it's too low, it becomes 2 over 9. So we generate a synthetic rate which somehow reflects a proxy or approximation for probably what the weight is, how much we can trust that this is significant. The more often it's reported, the greater the trust. The less often reported, the less the trust. And we need to have it, ideally a number between 0 and 1, and of course the logical way is the highest number becomes the denominator, in this case 9, and we work from there. So that gives us a weight for it. So do we have a match? Do we have, yes, just bacteria is a concern for this person with diabetes. And then for each one of the bacteria, we get a weight depending on how well matched it is across many studies. A couple of things is we ignore bacteria that do not match. Basically, it doesn't match, we ignore it. We don't care about the possibility which you can get hung up onto that some of the modifiers we pick could push some of these bacteria in in the wrong direction. We basically go and intentionally go for a blinker because we don't know how much of an ingredient is going to shift something, and the complexities just get massive. So we simplify things down and we say we blinker only on the ones that are selected by criteria, and we give each one of them the weight according to how often different studies report this particular type of shift. And we use the way to compute modifiers that have the greatest amount of positive impact. So, some so when you go back and you take a look at all these different things, you may get 25 of them being matches. So whatever you're doing for a modifier may impact half of those, eight of the dozen that it impacts is positive and 4 is negative. So what we end up having to do is trying to estimate a way so we select the best ones. Chances of finding something which has only the right impact is very low. So what we have to do is we trying to balance the good and the bad out and get the one that has the best expected good benefits. And we use the weights above to compute the modifiers that have the greatest amount of positive impact. Keyword, there's a great temptation. I know I went down this pathway first and then realized no, you are over speculating. We ignore the quantity of the bacteria because we don't have the data to make use of the quantity. None of the studies indicate what type of curve happens with the incidence as it goes high or low. All sorts of data which if we were to do a good statistical model for which modifiers to choose, we need to have that and we don't. So ignore the quantity of the bacteria, the fact that yes, you have it, and here's the weight based on the prevalence that gets reported in studies. In other words, what is the probability of it being, of the match being done, and do it that way. We ignore how much over or how much under. You basically could, but the problem is, or my gut personal feeling is you're overreading the data. So avoid that. It's a temptation, but avoid doing that. So, to do a recap, the logic we're doing is very straightforward. We match against the reported shifts. It's a yes or no. We use the prevalence as part of our matching criteria. Prevalence simply means how often does it occur in the population. So if it's something that occurs 2% of the time, then our criteria for saying this is significant is tight. You can play with that depending on what your own particular feeling is. Again, these are punts. These are ways to get around some of the problems. Whatever you do, try to be consistent. We use a number of studies for what weight we give because we don't know whether or not the identification of the bacteria in a study matches the identification of the bacteria from your sample report or from the sample report. There is ambiguity there use the polite term. Let's face it, excuse the bad pun, we are dealing with shit or shite. So we use a number of studies to try to give a weight, and we're trying to convert it to a probability, and then we use that to compute suggestions to optimize the amount of shift. Remember, modifiers are yes, no, take or avoid. So that becomes it. So most of the things are yes or no, yes, no, yes, no, and where the real value comes in is the weight, and that weight we are trying to adjust for the uncertainty of correct identification. And generally, when we do everything, we calculate a weight, and the higher the weight, the better it is, or the lower the weight if it's a negative value. The worse it is, the more it should be avoided. Okay, and that's basically it. So thank you for my little bit of rambling. That's my contact information. Generally, don't phone me because time differences. Plus, also I have a fair amount of call filtering. There's my preferred email and the microbiome website. So this hopefully will give you a indication of the problem. when a commercial retail lab says, because this study says this is too high and therefore you should take that with a big, not grain of salt, half a liter of salt, because the chances are roughly 1 in 100 that that's correct. Um, and they need to go and do more studies. And for example, as you can see from here, we have lots and lots and lots and lots of studies of it. And down below, you can actually go and if you click through here, you get to oh sorry. Okay, you if you were logged in, you would go and get the studies. Basically encouraging people to become registered before giving out that information or accessing information, and to stop machine learning bots, machine large language from harvesting my data. So yeah, so that's about it on that finish there, and hopefully just help explain the issue that you cannot just work from one study because it says it is a particular bacteria. Doesn't mean it is a bacteria. It's the same bacteria according to your lab results. That is one of the hardest things for a lot of people to get their head around, uh, because it basically converts everything to be ambiguous or fuzzy logic model, which fortunately is part of my academic training and what I've taught university classes on. So I said, oh, I know what it's about. I know how to handle it reasonably well. Okay, so, and of course, all of that incorporated in the site microbiome description. Okay, I'll shut up or else I'll just keep talking.